Please turn in your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 19.
You must have read ahead.
So we'll see a transition tonight in the saga of David and Saul. We're going to, most likely we'll hit 2 chapters tonight because chapter 19 is relatively short and chapter 19 and 20 really flow together. So I'm glad we got a little bit of an early start.
No cliffhanger?
Let's see. I don't think there's much of a cliffhanger in this. It's relatively predictable, unfortunately, that King Saul is on the downhill and he has this insecurity that causes him to be suspicious of David when all David has done has been for the benefit of Saul and the benefit of the nation of Israel. But Saul's ways are twisted because he walked away from the Lord. We get a volunteer to read chapter 19, verses 1 through 7.
Do it.
I will.
Go ahead, Bill.
Saul told his son Jonathan and all the attendants to kill David. But Jonathan had taken a great liking to David and warned him, "My father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning. Go into hiding and stay there. I will go out and stand with my father in the field where you are at. I'll speak to him about you, and will tell you what I find out." Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul, his father, and said to him, Let not the king do wrong to his servant David. He has not wronged you, and what he has done has benefited you greatly. He took his life in his hands when he killed the Philistine. The Lord won a great victory for all Israel, and you saw it and were glad. Why then would you do wrong to an innocent man like David by killing him for no reason? Saul listened to Jonathan and took this oath: as surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death. So Jonathan called David and told him the whole conversation. He brought him to Saul, and David was with Saul as before.
Thanks, Will. So the relationship between these two is going back and forth. And one of the things that the writer has been doing for a couple of chapters, and it will continue tonight in chapter 19, is he goes back and forth between the love of Jonathan, the love of Michael, the love of the people, or the love of Saul's servants. He'll go between that and Saul's hatred and jealousy and fear of David. He'll hit one, then he hits the other, then he hits one and hits the other. Because of that, some of this will look a bit, it doesn't flow chronologically perfectly. It's not the point to give us a chronology necessarily of this happened, then this happened, then this happened. The point is to make that contrast. So when we read this, and as we get further in, you're going to go, whoa, wait a minute. It doesn't really make sense that he's doing this now, but he already did this kind of thing earlier. What he's doing is contrasting, again, how far Saul is sliding down the scale, so to speak, as compared to even just the normal people, the common people. So, chapter 19. And Saul spoke to Jonathan his son and to all his servants that they should kill David. So now we see a transition from Saul and his lone effort to take David out to now he's willing to hire assassins. He's willing to hire people to try and take out his, quote, enemy, which in reality is not his enemy. Unfortunately, this is not the sole event of Saul using others to try and bring an end to David. In fact, that theme of Saul and chasing David will continue for the rest of the book. That's pretty much what the rest of the book is going to be about. David, his exploits in avoiding Saul and Saul's hunting him down. You know, when Saul was made a king, he was taken from his everyday life, and it seems that within a matter of weeks, he was on the throne, and he really had no preparation. You know, I'm not trying to make excuses for Saul's character, but he was pulled out from an ordinary, everyday life and given unlimited resources and unlimited power. He could do whatever he wanted. Nobody's going to question him. On the other hand, David gets anointed as the king, and now David will flee, he will hide, he will run and hide from Saul for 15 years. That's the preparation he has for the throne. He's a different kind of king. He has known suffering. He has known what it's like to have nothing. I mean, he had something when he was a kid. They weren't a wealthy family, but they had a roof over their head. They had sheep, so they had food. They had a farm. When he is on the run, he is on the run. And there are times, we're going to read about a time where he has no food. And he eats the holy bread because he has no food. Him and his men have nothing to eat, and they haven't had anything to eat. Right? So David gets an education, but not in the school of the kings, but in the school of hard knocks. So verse 2, or excuse me, the end of verse 1, but Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David, in verse 2, and Jonathan told David, Saul my father seeks to kill you. Therefore be on your guard in the morning. Stay in a secret place and hide yourself. I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are, and I will speak to my father about you. And if I learn anything, I will tell you. We have a couple of moral dilemmas in this chapter. This is the softer of the two, where Jonathan really is deceptive with his father. He doesn't necessarily tell his father what's going on, and he's gathering information and kind of, playing for the other side in a sense. The other one we'll see will be David's wife, Michal. She will basically lie and make up a story of what David did or what David said in her defense. And we'll deal with that when we get to it. But some of these things that we deal with as Christians are not black and white. And we don't want to confuse this with situational ethics to say, well, I'm in this situation, therefore I can do such and such. That's the way of our culture now. If I love this person and we're in a long-term committed relationship, then we're free to have sex. That's situational ethics. It says the situation allows me to make my own decision ethically that is apart from a social norm or apart from what is biblically true and the right way to live. This is not situational ethics in that respect, but what it will show us is that things aren't always cut and dry, and there are times when one law or one something of a certain importance will outweigh something else. When you're in this, which way am I going to go? And we're going to go with the one of higher importance. So Jonathan sets this ruse to figure this out. He says he's going to go and stand beside his father in the field where you are, and I will speak to my father about you, and if I learn anything, I will tell you. So he's going to take his father out to the field. David's going to be nearby so David can hear it from himself, and if there's anything that David doesn't hear, or if there's something that he picks up that David might not pick up, Jonathan will fill in the gaps. Verse 4, and Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul his father, and said to him, let not the king sin against his servant David, because he has not sinned against you, and because his deeds have brought good to you, for he took his life in his hand when he struck down the Philistine, and the Lord worked a great salvation for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. Why then will you sin against innocent blood by killing David without cause? So Jonathan makes his point. What has he done? Everything that he has done has been to your benefit, and it wasn't minor things. He risked his very life for something you should have been doing. King Saul should have been the one that fought Goliath, but instead David went out there and did it. And we get a temporary reprieve here. Verse 6 says, Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan. Saul swore, as the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death. Okay, so he's taken a vow and said, I'm not going to have him put to death. Verse 7, Jonathan called David, and Jonathan reported to him all these things. And Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as before. So at this point, it works. It looks like things are calmed down, but it's a brief delay, I guess, or pause of peace before Saul will continue pursuing David's life. And verse 8 picks right up there, and I'll read this little section in verse 8. Actually, Paul, why don't you read this one for us? Just verse 8 through 10. It's not a little paragraph.
War broke out again after that. David led his troops against the Philistines. He attacked them with such fury that they all ran away. But one day, when Saul was sitting at home with spear in his hand, the tormenting spirit from the Lord suddenly came upon him. Again, as David played his harp, Saul hurled his spear at David, but David dodged out of the way, and leaving the spear stuck in the wall, he fell and escaped into the night.
Thank you. There's a big difference between Eastern literature and Western. In ours, that would have taken 2 pages to write. But there's things that are missing, so to speak, in what's going on here that our Western minds want to know. In this culture, there's a theme that they're bringing out, and they don't add all the other details. So it says, and then there was war again, and David went out and fought the Philistines and struck them with a great blow, so that they fled before him. So some amount of time has passed. The Philistines have attacked again. David is a leader, and he goes out and again has victory. Every time that David has had victory, Saul responds by more jealousy against David. So it kind of assumes that we've already got that down, and we don't need to be brought up to speed on that this is happening, and it points to the result of it, though, in verse 9. Then a harmful spirit from the Lord came upon Saul. See, Saul is sitting there, and he's musing how every time he goes out, and who knows, earlier they had sung this song, the women did, and when the troops would come back from battle, they're singing their song that Saul has killed his thousands and David his tens of thousands. And one thing, as I was reading some additional commentary this week, I learned that they would do it in this back and forth way, where the married women would sing the first verse, and then the virgin or the unmarried women would sing the second. So the first ones, the married women are singing, Saul has slain his thousands, and then the virgins say, and David his tens of thousands. And it's simply Hebrew poetry. They're lumping these guys together. But see, Saul, in his insecurity, says, well, wait a minute. They're ascribing to David this and to me only this. Hey, they're lumping the whole thing together. They're not trying to say that David is greater than you are. They're saying together you guys have had a great victory, and that's how Hebrew poetry flows. This is a synthetic parallelism where you have two things being said, the same thing being said in two different ways. They use Saul first, and then they use David second, and they just add to it. It's a very common thing that you see in the Psalms.
So they're just adding numbers together?
They're just saying how great it is. It's this great. It's even greater in verse 2. They're just showing the greatness of their men in victory, in the victory of their battles. They're not necessarily saying David's a better warrior than Saul. But in Saul's insecurity, that's exactly what he hears. They're saying that? What more can he have but the kingdom, is Saul's response. So who knows if he's hearing more singing now? But he goes out to battle. Well, you got a question?
But it's also paranoid about him. Why isn't he making him a leader in the army? I don't understand that at all. He's putting him in power about 1,000 men at least, right?
He goes, well, Saul's sanity seems to go back and forth.
Yeah.
For one thing, he makes some good decisions with David,
Like Bowler.
but he didn't stick with it. And as we saw earlier, he thinks that by putting David out there in the battle, David's going to get killed by the Philistines. David's God's anointed. He's not going to die in battle against the Philistines.
I think Saul keeps hoping David will go down in battle.
It's
So
the
he
same
keeps
thing
on
over and
saying,
over.
Yeah, he does.
He's getting a better leader.
Definition of
more
insanity.
troops.
Yeah.
So
He keeps sending him out, he keeps coming back.
Saul's in his home, and again,
Christmas weird.
this tormenting spirit comes upon him, and he has his spear in his hand. Yes, ma'am?
So it says the evil spirit came from the Lord. Like, how does the evil spirit come from God? Like,
Well, for one, God is the only God. So everything that happens in one sense is of God,
So he's allowing this to happen.
He's not
Absolutely.
dead, right? Yeah.
right? You read the book of Job, look what happened to Job. Okay? All that was ordained by God for a purpose. I believe the reason that this evil spirit was coming upon King Saul was to cause him to turn and to seek God. But he doesn't. He seeks a musician to relieve him of his stress. Instead of going to he's battling with the symptom instead of getting to the core of it and getting back and getting right with God. That's the problem of it. The Lord will use, in my opinion, anything to save his people. And if he has got to use something evil and wicked against us to get our attention, to get us back to him, this is his planet. This is his world. He is free to use anything in any way at any time.
Like making us hit a curb and blowing our tire.
But we win and he works everything out for good. I read that somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, and then, how do we define good in that?
Have it.
Good, as defined in Romans 8:29, is being formed into the image of Christ,
It's love, right?
right? Yeah, being formed into the image of Christ, and ultimately that, love has a lot to do with that. So in all things, God is working for the good. In all things, God is working in us to form our character into the image of Christ. So in these evil things that are coming at us, he's not coming at us to harm us. We can look at it and go, I don't see a whole lot of good in that. But that's what he's doing. He's shaping our character through this. Now we have to make the right decisions in this so that we don't, they say you can become bitter or better as these difficult things in life come your way. We want to make sure that we're responding in a way that we get better, not bitter, because that's God's desire for us. That's why I believe this evil spirit comes upon Saul. God's not trying to harm him, other than harm him to a point where Saul will respond and cry out to him.
Is it David, this David that writes most of the Psalms?
It is.
So maybe that's God's purpose to have the Psalms.
That David will write a good portion of his Psalms in the rest, as we're reading the rest of this chapter. Excuse me, not the rest of the chapter, the rest of this book of 1 Samuel. As he's fleeing from Saul, he writes a good number of the Psalms, because a lot of his stuff comes out of his pain. Not all of his Psalms are that way. Some are just pure praise when things are going very well.
So during his 15 years of exile is where most of the Psalms came from?
And well, the 15 years is a good portion of them. There's also another time where he's fleeing from Absalom, his son, and he's writing them at that time as well.
Huh.
Yeah. So David's doing his part. Earlier it said that he had been back with Saul as before. So David's doing his part here. He's playing the lyre, and Saul sought to pin him to the wall with the spear. But David eluded Saul so that he struck the spear into the wall. Now, earlier when we read this, it said that David eluded him twice. Now, that twice may have referred to the previous time and this time, or maybe that there was 2 times earlier, and this time, like the third time's a charm. He was like, I'm not sticking around for another time. But David eludes him, and now he flees, and he escapes. And he goes home. He goes home to his wife. So I'll read this next section, verses 11 through 17. So Saul sent messengers to David's house to watch him, but that he might kill him in the morning. At least he's letting him get a nice sleep, huh? But Michal, David's wife, told him, if you do not escape with your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed. So Michal let David down through the window, and he fled away and escaped. Michal took an image and laid it on the bed and put a pillow of goat's hair at its head and covered it with clothes. When Saul sent messengers to David, he said, he is sick. Excuse me, she said, he is sick. Then Saul sent messengers to see David, saying, bring him up to me in the bed that I may kill him. And the messengers came, and behold, the image was in the bed with a pillow of goat hair at its head. Saul said to Michal, why have you deceived me thus, and let my enemy go, so that he has escaped? And Michal answered, he said to me, let me go. Why should I kill you? David never said that, did he? Not that we know of, right? She was helping him out. So David escapes. Saul sends a group after him, and for whatever reason, they don't just bust in the door and get him, but they're waiting for him. Michal somehow is aware of this, whether she sees the guys milling about smartly outside or whatever, and she tells David, you need to take action, buddy. You need to get out of here, because he's after you, and he's not going to stop until he gets you. So David escapes through the window, and it says that there's an image or an idol she put in the bed. That's pretty trippy. And nobody, in all that I read, none of the commentaries really addressed the fact that there was an idol in David's home. So I don't have much to say about that other than it apparently was an idol. Other than, I read one of the commentaries, so to speak, that I'm reading is Josephus. He's a first century Jewish historian, and he writes his version of this. And he wrote that it was a goat's liver in the bed, and that when they moved, the goat's liver was moving, and they could see it move. Somehow they thought, that was David, because of the fact that it was moving. It wasn't still. There's nowhere in the text that says it's a goat's liver. It's interesting how Josephus, who's getting his stuff from the oral traditions of the Jews, they're not going to admit that there was an idol in David's home. You know, they're like, nope, it's got to be something else. It must have been this, right? So Michal lets him out. David escapes, and verse 14, Saul sent messengers to take David. He is sick. Then he sends messengers back. Well, bring him in his bed that I may kill him. And then he confronts his daughter in verse 17. Why have you deceived me thus and let my enemy go, so that he has escaped? Michal answered and said to me, he said to me, let me go. Why should I kill you? And most of the time when we read in the Bible of deception and lies, there is negative, it's portrayed in a negative light, or there's negative commentary about it. This is kind of portrayed in a positive light, the way it's handled. And this is the point at which I would say that human life trumps a lie. And if you've got to make a decision, you know, we'll take for example the movie The Hiding Place, which portrays Holland, I believe, during World War II. Corrie ten Boom and her family, they're watchmakers, and they're hiding Jews. And Corrie's sister, I forget her name, she won't lie. It wasn't Betsy, it was a different one. There's another sister, Ollie or something like that. She tells the truth. And because of her telling the truth, the Nazis take a Jewish woman and put her to death. And the rest of the family's kind of with Corrie, saying, you know, I think this is a time in which we're just going to have to explain to God later. This is what I did. I made a decision, and I went with it. Yes, sir.
Is there ever an explanation as to why Michal didn't go with him? She just didn't fear.
She's a king's daughter, for one thing. I doubt she wants to live life on the run.
Normally a wife would have followed their man, you would think.
I think it depends on the time and who they are. You know, to follow him during this time is a hard life.
Well, that he could. I mean, like you said, it's not very. It doesn't really give you very much detail. He came in, and
Yeah,
I'm pretty
point
sure
of it
they
is-
talked about it and said, "Hey, like
Yeah.
I have to."
What
leave.
we're given here is the basic details of what took place, not necessarily all of what took place.
Because she covered his tracks.
So she said, she deceives her father and she lies. That is not permission for us to lie. If we think, well, if I
So
tell
she
the
would have felt
truth,
confident that her
I'm gonna
dad
get in
was gonna
trouble.
kill her.
At this point, she's not real sure how her dad's gonna respond. And as we get later into the chapter, possibly the next, we're gonna see that she made the right decision.
All right.
So, can we get someone to read verse 18 through the end of the chapter? Okay.
Now David fled and escaped and came to Samuel at Ramah and told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and stayed in Naioth. It was told Saul, saying, Behold, David is at the Naioth in Ramah. Then Saul sent messengers to take David, but when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying, with Samuel standing and presiding over them, the Spirit of God came upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied. When it was told Saul, he sent other messengers, and they also prophesied. So Saul sent messengers again the third time, and they also prophesied. Then he himself went to Ramah and came as far as the large well that is in Siku, and he asked and said, Where are Samuel and David? And someone said, Behold, they are at the Naioth in Ramah. Well, that's a mouthful.
Mm-hmm.
He proceeded there to Naioth in Ramah, and the Spirit of God came upon him also. so that he went along prophesying continually until he came to Naioth in Ramah. He also stripped off his clothes, and he too prophesied before Samuel, and lay down naked all that day and all that night. Therefore they say, is Saul also among the prophets?
Thank you. Wow. So David flees and escapes. And who can he go to for help? I don't think he could have made a better decision than what he did here. He goes to Samuel, the kingmaker, and he explains his situation to him. So Samuel takes him, and they go to Naioth. And Naioth isn't necessarily a city. It's one of those words that is transliterated. We're not sure exactly what it means. Most likely, it is an area of tents that the shepherds dwelled in. That's what the term basically points to. So it's in Ramah, which is Samuel's hometown. And interestingly, this whole thing's now going to take place in the place that Saul was led to by the Spirit when he was looking for his donkeys originally, and Samuel anointed him. So, excuse me, Samuel takes David to Naioth rather, and now they're chasing after him. So somebody rats David out, verse 20, then Saul sent messengers to take David. So he sends a band. These aren't necessarily messengers just going to give a message. You know, this is the secret police or whoever. They're after him, right? And Samuel was standing in a group of prophets, and the Spirit of God come upon these guys, and now they start prophesying, right? So you got all these tough guys, and they're coming up to do their thug action, and next thing you know, they're not doing anything, right? They're in such a state that they cannot control themselves. This prophesying, it's an ecstatic utterance. They don't have control over what they're doing at this point. The Spirit comes upon them and foils their plan. And it's not a long-term thing. It happens for a short period of time. And then apparently they go back and they tell Saul what happened. He sends another group out, same thing happens. He sends a third group out, same thing happens. And he's like, you know what, if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. So he goes, and he's like, where are Samuel and David? And they go, they're over there, in the tents with the shepherds. All right, so they go over there, and the Spirit now comes upon Saul. And remember, every time we've seen this Spirit coming upon Saul, it's been the tormenting spirit. And it doesn't really say which way or another it's happening here, but it says he prophesied, and I think we pointed this out last time, that this ecstatic utterance, it's the same words it said when he raved in his house and through the Spirit of David. It's the same words. So we're not sure exactly how he's responding, but we know that he is not in control of himself. So he goes to do this thing, and I don't know, it's a trip. This is some of the oddest stuff in the Bible, these are not the okay, now I can't think of it. Clones, no, not the clones. Drones, there we go. These are not the drones you're looking for, right? And they just go and do their own thing. He has this power over him. And then verse 24, he stripped off his clothes and he prophesied before Samuel and lay naked all that day and all that night. Now that's how you get sunburned, right? The term though.
No tan lines though.
The term that he's naked doesn't necessarily mean he had no clothes. More than likely he had stripped off his kingly robe. And that's the point of this, is that he's no longer dressed as a king. He's laying out there on the ground in his underwear, right, ranting.
Do they like DVDs?
Uh,
Just check.
I've never actually seen them.
I
But you
found
never
that a
know.
tormenting spirit.
Tiny
Make a man get naked and lay around all day.
Yeah, not do anything,
Yeah.
but yet run his mouth.
Go down that path.
Yeah.
Is he in the middle of the street like that?
You know, it doesn't say where he was per se, but he was in front of Samuel, and he has no power over himself. And then it ends the chapter and says, "Thus it is said, is Saul also among the prophets?" We've heard that before.
Who asked that?
It's a proverb that was told from this event, right? It's a saying that came out of these happenings. Now earlier, when Saul, very first time he was anointed, he joined a group of prophets and he prophesied with them, and it was told, is Saul also among the prophets? And so at that time, it was a very positive thing to say, wait, what has happened to the son of Kish? He has gone from being an ordinary guy to a man who the Spirit of God comes upon him, and he has these utterances. Now the same term is used in a derogatory sense to say he's gone from being the king to being a raving maniac who lays on the ground, you know, possibly butt naked, sunburn, you know, you roll over and get some on the back side. Yeah, so, you know, the first time it was shown as a very positive light, and now it's used, the same terms are used in a derogatory sense to show that he's not acting
Well,
like a
back in those days, if you were caught naked in the street, wasn't it shameful? I mean, that was
It's shameful
what they
today.
did. Well,
right?
Yeah.
I don't think the culture's changed that much. It's been 3,000 years, but if you caught naked in the street, you go into jail, homie.
That's what I'm saying.
Right?
but wasn't it something that they did though? I mean, like as a punishment, they stripped them naked to shame them to.
I don't know if that's during this time. I've never read anything like that in the scripture, so I don't know that to be true. It sounds pretty shameful to me, though.
Yeah.
So we're going to continue on now into chapter 20. Don't get used to this one. Doing 2 chapters in one night. I don't know. We'll see. See if we can't slip some more in as we go further. All right. Can we get a volunteer to read the first 11 verses? Let's see. Will wants to read it. Can we get a volunteer named Will?
11 verses, add more.
Good luck.
Then David fled from
Naoth.
Naoth at
Ramah.
Ramah and went to Jonathan and asked, "What have I done? What is my crime? How have I wronged your father that he was trying to kill me?" "Never," Jonathan replied. You are not going to die. Look, my father doesn't do anything great or small without letting me know. Why would he hide this from me? It isn't so." But David took an oath and said, "Your father knows very well that I have found favor in your eyes." And he has said to himself, "Jonathan must not know this, or he will be grieved. Yet as surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, there is only a step between me and death." Jonathan said to David, Whatever you want me to do, I'll do for you." So David said, "Look, tomorrow is the new moon's feast, and I'm supposed to dine with the king, but let me go and hide in the field until the evening of the day after tomorrow. If your father misses me at all, tell him, David earnestly asked my permission to hurry to Bethlehem, his hometown, because an annual sacrifice is being made there for his whole clan. If he says, 'Very well, then your servant is safe.' But if he loses his temper, you can be sure that he is determined to harm me. As for you, show kindness to your servant, for you have brought him into a covenant with you before the Lord. If I am guilty, then kill me yourself. Why hand me over to your father? Never, Jonathan said. If I had the least inkling that my father was determined to harm you, wouldn't I tell you? David asked, who will tell me if your father answers you harshly? Come, Jonathan said, let's go into the field. So they went there together.
Thank you, Will. So David flees now as apparently Saul gets his wits back, puts his clothes back on. And he goes to Jonathan, and this just shows, even during this time, it shows David's character and his willingness to try and reconcile. You know, what have I done here? If there's something, show me what I've done, I'll make it right. You know, but there's nothing. There's nothing that he's done. So there's no making it right. What is it? What is my sin before your father that he seeks my life? Jonathan's reply is, far from it, you shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing, either great or small, without disclosing it to me. And why should my father hide this from me? But David argues with him and says, your father knows well that I have found favor in your eyes, and he thinks, do not let Jonathan know, lest he be grieved. But as truly as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death. Wow. So back to his friend Jonathan, trying to figure this thing out. Jonathan tells him, you're not going to die in this situation. You know, Jonathan he's interesting, he has some real insights. And now they're going to set up another time to feel Saul out and try to figure out, does he truly want David's life? This is the point where it's kind of like, well, why are they doing this again? You know, but again, we see back and forth. We're seeing the love of Jonathan here, and then we're going to see the hatred of Saul. So remember, this is really what the author is doing, is he's showing us these contrasts over and over again before we get into this big scene of chapter after chapter of Saul chasing after David. So then in verse 4, Jonathan says to David, whatever you say, I will do for you. Wow. David says to Jonathan, behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit at the table with the king, but let me go, that I may hide myself in the field till the third day at evening. If your father misses me at all, say, David earnestly asked me to leave and run to Bethlehem, his city, where there is a yearly sacrifice for all the clan. If he says, good, then it will be well with your servant. But if he is angry, then know that harm is determined by him. Therefore deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into the covenant. But if there is guilt in me, kill me yourself, for why should you bring me to your father? And Jonathan said again, far be it from you. If I knew that it was determined by my father to harm you, would I not tell you? See, Jonathan's not convinced yet. Then David says to Jonathan, who will tell me if your father answers me roughly? Jonathan says to David, come, let us go out into the field. So they both go out into the field. So we see this dialogue back and forth between them, and we see the beginning of this ruse. They're each month at the new moon that the Jews use a lunar calendar. Our calendar is determined by the sun. The Jews is determined by the moon, right? So it's basically the same. It's just off just a little bit. They go from, their day starts at sundown. When the moon comes out, that's the start of their day. So they go from evening to morning. And when the new moon starts, that's the start of their month. And each new moon, they have a feast. and a
Is that a full
sacrifice.
moon?
Excuse me?
Each full moon?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, or the new moon, not the full moon, the new moon, right? I'm not sure, I'm not a big moon guy, but nonetheless. I'm not a lunatic, right? Lunar, get it? So if we went back to Leviticus, you would see that God had told him, you're gonna celebrate every month at the new moon. And the king has his celebration. David, being one of his men in his court, would be required to come and eat with the king. And they each, we're gonna see this, how each person has their assigned seat. And David says, look, if you tell him he has to go to his hometown because they're having a big thing, which they do once a year, if he goes, okay, well, that's cool, well, we'll see him next month, then hey, it's all good. But if he starts ranting, you know this guy's out for me. Jonathan agrees, okay, that'll be the final test. I will certainly know at this point. Because, you know, you don't want to believe the worst about those you love. I'll tell you, I had it right in front of me. Right in front of me. It was clear as the nose on my face, but just like I can't see my own nose, I couldn't see it. You know, when a family member was involved with drugs and doing things and then lying to me, I didn't believe it. I didn't believe it was a lie. I believed everything this person said, and there was very, very little truth in it. And I think that's kind of where Jonathan's at right now, is he loves excuse me, he loves David, but he loves his father too. He doesn't want to believe the worst about his dad. All right, so we are at verse 12. I'm going to read this next section from 12 to 17. And Jonathan said to David, now they're out in the field. Jonathan says to David, let the Lord, the God of Israel, be witness. When I have sounded out my father about this time tomorrow, or the third day, behold, if he is well disposed toward David, then shall I not send and disclose it to you? But should it please my father to do you harm, the Lord do so to Jonathan, and more also, if I do not disclose it to you, and send you away, that you may go in safety. May the Lord be with you, as he has been with my father. If I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord, that I may not die. And do not cut off your steadfast love from my house forever, when the Lord cuts off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth. And Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, may the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies. And Jonathan made David swear by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. So Jonathan is so convinced David is the next king. He says, I'm going to protect you through this. But when this is all over and done with, and my dad's gone, and you are the next king, remember me. Remember, I'm the one that protected you. Because in these Eastern cultures, and even in up into the European cultures, it was quite common when a new king would take over, they would kill all who had any inkling of a right to the throne. So they would go into, in this situation, David would go and search out every relative known of Saul's to as far as they could figure relatives, cousins, distant cousins, and kill every single person in the family. That's how it went. We see that happening. We won't necessarily read that, but that happens in the Kings, where it's actually a woman who takes over the throne for a period of time, and she kills all her own children because one of her sons dies, and rather than having the next one who is supposed to become king, she wants to be in charge. So she murders her own children. That's how ruthless some of these people are. Ooh. And Jonathan wants to make sure that no matter what happens, I mean, these guys are friends, but things change over years. And he knows David's going on the run. So he makes another oath with him and says, when all this plays out, remember me
Wasn't
with your loving kindness. Yes, sir?
wasn't there that remember me when Saul became king too?
I don't remember. So, verse 12, Jonathan said to David, the Lord, the God of Israel, be witness. So they call the Lord himself as a witness to this thing. When I have sounded out my father this time tomorrow, if he is well disposed towards you, I'm just going to come out and tell you. But if he's not, we got to have something set up, because he's probably going to be watching me. He knows we're friends, right? Then he goes on and says, may the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. Verse 14. And now he goes on to this second portion. If I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord, that I may not die. And I think that's really the theme of this chapter, is the steadfast love of the Lord. And I know I've shared this before. I don't know if anyone remembers. The term in the Hebrew that's translated here, steadfast love, is hesed, H-E-S-E-D. It's translated in a variety of ways in the Old Testament. Here we see steadfast love. It's often translated loving kindness. And it's a covenant type love. The type of love that should be between a husband and a wife. It's the type of love that God has for us. We are children of the new covenant. So God has this love for us that is not dependent upon our actions. It's determined by the covenant he has with us. And remember, this love is not a feeling necessarily. Sometimes there's a feeling that comes along with it. Sometimes there is not. But the end result is you do good to the other party. And the Old Testament, there's hundreds and hundreds of times that word is used in reference to God toward the nation of Israel. His hesed, his loving kindness, his steadfast love. And there are a number of times where it's used between individuals. And here we see it between these two men who have this covenant of love towards each other. I'm taking care of you. You have my word before God. I'm going to do the right thing. And I'm going to help you, David. I'm going to help you escape if my father is determined to do you harm. But have that same kind of love for me and my family, even after I'm dead. And David carries that out. If we were to go on into 2 Samuel, we would read that there is one left in Saul's family, and that is Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth. Say that 10 times quickly. And unfortunately, because of this thing where the new king would kill the family of the previous, when Saul and Jonathan died in battle, Mephibosheth is an infant, and his nurse picks him up, and she's fleeing, she's running to save this baby's life, and she drops him. And it cripples him. Both of his legs are broken. They don't have the orthopedic surgeons that we have today, and the boy never walks. And David searches him out. It says one night David's just laying in his bed, and he's thinking about all the great things that God has done and where he's brought him. This is after all the chasing, all that stuff is over. Now David is the king of the nation, and he's thinking, I wonder if there's anybody in Saul's family that's alive that I can show this loving kindness to. And he searches out the entire country, and they find Mephibosheth. And when Mephibosheth is brought before David, he's afraid. He thinks he's going to be killed. And David says, no. You rest. I'm only here for peace and to provide for you. And all of Saul's lands that people had taken after Saul's death are given to Mephibosheth. So he gives him great wealth. And then David says, but you don't even need any of that because you're going to eat at my table every night. Which doesn't necessarily mean he sits there and eats with the king, but the king provides for him the rest of his life. Yeah. So David does fulfill this covenant. So verse 18, can we get somebody to read 18 through 23?
I'll do it. Then Jonathan said to David, "Tomorrow is the new moon feast. You will be missed because your seat will be empty. The day after tomorrow, towards the evening, go to the place where you hid. When this trouble begins, and wait by the stone Azeel, I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as though we were shooting at a target. Then I will send a boy and say, 'Go find the arrows.' If I say to him, 'Look, the arrows are here on the side of you, bring them here,' then come, because as surely as the Lord lives, you are safe. There is no danger. But if I say to the boy, 'Look, the arrows are beyond you,' then you must go, because the Lord has sent you away. And about the matter you and I had discussed, remember the Lord is witness between you and me forever."
Thank you. So here is the plan. Tomorrow, your seat's going to be empty. I'm going to say these things to my dad, and we're going to see how it plays out. If it goes bad, this is how we're going to deal with it, right? So nobody knows. You know, he's just going out to shoot some arrows. Nobody knows what's going on. If he shoots the arrows one way and says something to the kid one way, it's all good. Shoots the arrows a different way and says something different to the kid, it's all bad. Flee. So can we get someone to read verse 24 through 34?
So David hid in the field, and when the new moon feast came, the king sat down to eat. He sat in his customary place by the wall, opposite Jonathan, and Abner sat next to Saul, but David's place was empty. Saul said nothing that day, for he thought something must have happened to David to make him ceremonially unclean. Surely he is unclean. But the next day, the second day of the month, David's place was empty again. Then Saul said to his son Jonathan, "Why hasn't the son of Jesse come to the meal either yesterday or today?" Jonathan answered, "David earnestly asked me for permission to go to Bethlehem. He said, 'Let me go because our family is observing a sacrifice in the town, and my brother has ordered me to be there. If I found favor in your eyes, let me go away to see my brothers.' That is why he has not come to the king's table." Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan, and he said to him, "You son of a perverse and rebellious woman, don't I know that you side with the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you? As long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send someone to bring him to me, for he must die. Why should he be put to death? What has he done?" Jonathan asked his father, but Saul hurled his spear at him to kill him. Then Jonathan knew that his father intended to kill him. Jonathan got up from the table and in fierce anger. On the second day of the feast, he did not eat because he was grieved at his father's shameful treatment of David.
Thank you. Wow. The story is coming to
There's his answer.
a peak here, yeah.
Yes,
So David hides himself in the field. When the new moon comes, the king sits down at the table in his customary seat by the wall. Right? Outlaws recognize that. You sit with your back to the wall, right? Because you don't want anybody sneaking up from behind. It's just that's how it works. Jonathan sat opposite him. See, everybody has their assigned seat, so he knows. You know, he doesn't have to look around and go, "Is David here somewhere?" No, David's supposed to be right here. He's not right here. Where's David? And so first night he's like, he's probably unclean. It happens, right? If you're not ceremonially clean, you did something, you touched a dead body, there's a variety of things that could have happened, then you don't go. You gotta wait until the next day. And keep yourself clean so that you can enjoy the festival the next day. So he does. And he waits until the next day. David's not there again. Saul loses it. Because he wants to take action against him, right? He doesn't want to hear a bunch of stories about where David is. He wants action. So, let's see, where are we? Verse 27, but on the second day, the day after the new moon, David's place was empty. And Saul said to his son Jonathan, why has not the son of Jesse come to the meal, either yesterday or today? Look where Saul's at here. He can't even bring himself to say David's name. This guy is tore up. When I was early in recovery, we used to call this free rent. Somebody's in your head, they're living in your head. They're not even thinking about you, but all you can do is think about them and all this trouble they're giving you, right? Free rent. They're living in there, they're not paying anything, but they're running around in your head doing all this damage. That's what's happening to Saul. David's not all concerned and trying to cause all kinds of problems, but Saul is consumed by him. He can't even speak his name. So, why has not the son of Jesse come to the meal? All right, so now Jonathan tells the story. David earnestly asked me to go to Bethlehem. Again, we have this moral dilemma. Is it true that he asked to go to Bethlehem and he's going to this other feast? No. But what's on the flip side of this? David's life. Which one's going to weigh out? Life weighs out, right? So he asked, hey, can I go and do this thing? Verse 30, then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan. See that? Now he's escalating where he's angry at his own son. And Carol, you have New Living Translation. Would you read verse 30 from the NLT, please?
Verse 30. Saul boiled with rage at Jonathan. You stupid son of a whore. He swore to him, do you think I don't know that you want him to be king in your place?
That's good. Thank you. That's a whole lot more accurate than son of a perverse and rebellious woman. Right? That really tones it down. Yeah. Can you imagine saying that to your son? That's what you're calling your wife? Really? I mean, this dude is checked out, right? And then he says, hey, David, whom I'm trying to stop, you should be trying to stop him too, because as long as David lives, or as this son of Jesse lives, you're never going to be the king. And see, Jonathan has enough quality of character that he trusts God. If God wants me to be the king, I'll be the king. And if he doesn't want me to be the king, there's nothing I can do to be the king. Jonathan's good. And if anybody has anything to really be threatened here, it's Jonathan. Right? It's not Saul, it's Jonathan. And Jonathan's good with it. Yes, ma'am.
Does it talk about Saul's wife or anything? Like that she was like a believer? Because Jonathan seems like he has like a godly,
It doesn't. Most of the time in Scripture, like I said, the details of things are left out. We're given what we need to read the story through. I don't know of any other than these words, which obviously are not true. They're the ranting of an unstable man. We don't have, that I know of anyway, we don't have any evidence of her character.
because he only had one wife, right? That's the
Not sure. Yeah. That is probably mentioned at some point, whether he had more than one, but I don't know, to be honest with you. So he goes through this thing, calling her names, and then verse 31, for as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor the kingdom shall be established. Or excuse me, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. So he's trying to convince Jonathan, you need to come on my side here. I'm really just doing all this for you, right? Not so. Jonathan answers his father, why should he be put to death? What has he done? And Saul is done. So now his anger has gotten to the point where he's not hurling a spear only at David, he's hurling it at his own son. So to come against one, he's coming against the other now. He's lumped them both into the same pile. You think that his throne would be established if he had your spear through his neck? Right? So you can see his whole argument is falling apart by the way he's handling this, but that's not the point. That's not Saul's point. Saul's point is, I hate this guy. So, verse 33, but Saul hurled his spear at him to strike him. So Jonathan knew that his father was determined to put David to death. He's finally convinced, right? There was something that happened in my life with the same person that I was discussing earlier that I realized the truth, and it broke my heart, that this person was using me and lying to me, and it was hard. It was hard to admit, but I took action on it. And good to say that the whole situation has changed, and that person just yesterday, day before, had 13 years clean.
Nice.
Yeah, so things have changed. Verse 34, Jonathan rose from the table in fierce anger and ate no food the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David, because his father had disgraced him. So now there's a separation. But see, Jonathan will remain loyal to his father in this. He's in a very, very tough place. I'm going to go ahead and read this last bit, and we're going to finish up this chapter on time without a cliffhanger. Verse 35. In the morning, Jonathan went out into the field to the appointment with David, and with him a little boy. And he said to his boy, run and find the arrows that I shoot. As the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. And when the boy came to the place of the arrow that Jonathan had shot, Jonathan called after the boy and said, is not the arrow beyond you? And Jonathan called after the boy, hurry, be quick, do not stay. So Jonathan's boy gathered up the arrows and came to his master. But the boy knew nothing. Only Jonathan and David knew the matter. And Jonathan gave his weapons to the boy and said to him, go and carry them to the city. And as soon as the boy had gone, David rose from beside the stone heap and fell on his face to the ground and bowed 3 times. And they kissed one another and they wept with one another, David weeping the most. Then Jonathan said to David, go in peace, because we have sworn, both of us, in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord shall be between me and you, and between my offspring and your offspring forever. And he rose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. So Jonathan storms out of the feast, but he can't go and tell David at this point. He's not sure where David's at. They've got this set for the next morning, and they play it out. He shoots his arrows, and the boy's got the arrow, but he tells him, no, it's beyond you, because that was the signal, right? If he says it's to your left, then it's all good. But if he says it's beyond you, that means, David, you need to go, right? If the boy needs to go, you need to go. So he tells the boy, keep going. The boy gathers up all the arrows and brings them back, and he says, here's my stuff, go. And at that point, they're in privacy, And David comes out, and we have this very intimate scene of these two friends. This is really the last significant conversation these men have. They meet one more time after this, but it's just a brief moment. For the next 15 years, David will run, and he no longer has an opportunity to enjoy the relationship he had with Jonathan, his friend. And Jonathan said, so David and Jonathan, they're hugging on each other, and they're crying, because they know this is it. You know, this guy's the king. And unlike the president, the king can do what he pleases, and nobody will question him. I mean, his own son questions him, but it doesn't change what he's doing. He says to his army, you go get this man. They go get this man. They don't want necessarily David to die. David was their leader. But they're ordered to do it. They're going to do it. So Jonathan says to David, go in peace. And then he reminds him one last time of the covenant, because Jonathan knows in his heart of hearts that David will be the next king. And with that, he arose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. And that's the end.
Does anybody know how old David was when he became king?
Yeah,
I don't know how to work it.
close it.
That's it?